Hi, everybody. Welcome to another JetBrains webinar. I'm really excited about today's webinar and our guest, Oskar Dudycz. Did I say that right? I think I did.
Yeah,
But
close.
close. Oh, man, so close. But this is a topic I've really been interested throughout my career. Once you start working with databases and building enterprise applications, it's something that really can kind of take your company and your industry to the next level. So I'm really excited to talk to you, Oskar, today. But before we get started, let's go through some housekeeping. So let's go through the slides here. Uh, I know a lot of you folks right now are watching us on YouTube, watching us live. So if you want to participate in this webinar, please feel free to ask any questions somewhere on the chat. It's typically on the side there if you're watching us on youtube.com. Otherwise, feel free to send us questions on Twitter. I know Oskar is on Twitter. You'll get his Twitter handle later in the webinar, so you can ask him questions directly. So yeah, we love questions. Feel free to ask us those questions. A common question that everybody asks, I actually got asked this today privately in a DM. Is this webinar recorded? Yes, it is. You'll be able to watch this webinar after it goes, after we do this live on YouTube anytime that you like. So if you need to drop out in the middle of the webinar, want to rewind backwards to see a subject that maybe Oskar covered specifically, and you want to see the details of it, it'll be available on YouTube. So short of that, I want to welcome our guest, Oskar, who is kind of becoming the event sourcing guru. He called himself the event sorcerer of .NET. And I'm really excited to have him here. So Oskar, thank you again for doing this webinar. I think a lot of people are excited, as I can see in the chat today. So welcome.
Uh, Thanks, Khalid. Thank you. Thank you all for being here and joining our webinar. So yeah, we'll be talking about the event sourcing today and how to make it pragmatic and how Marten can help you on that. And as we are in the JetBrains webinar, then I think that I should type it without the dot. So few words about myself. So I'm a developer with over 15 years of experience. I went the whole journey from junior, mid-year, senior, manager, and I was working not so far ago as a developer advocate, so same role as Khalid. But you can find me on the internet. At the bottom, there is my Twitter handle. You can check my blog or the Architecture Weekly, which is the just architecture newsletter uh, that I'm sending every Monday. But that's all I think about me. We'll be focusing today about Marten, event sourcing, and .NET 6. And as Khalid mentioned and pictured me, that's so kind of him, and also calling me a guru. I'm not feeling myself as a guru, but I'm just trying to share what I learned. And even though I know that we always need to learn on our mistakes, then if I can spare you a bit, a few of them, then I can call it a win. Um, so we'll be talking about event sourcing, as I mentioned. So let's talk about the event sourcing architecture. And no, that's not the event sourcing architecture. If you see such slide or something similar, complex looking on the presentation or uh, on the blog post, then just close the tab because this is not event sourcing. So maybe this is event sourcing. No, if you see such diagram with a lot of boxes, then probably that's also not event sourcing. Because what's event sourcing in general? Event sourcing is not an architecture pattern. It's a design pattern that you should think about in the context of your specific module. So of course, you can apply that to all of your modules within your system and all of the services, even microservices, but that should be decision made case by case. Event sourcing in general is about focusing on the business workflow. So we are looking at the our business workflow and trying to find there a checkpoints. And those checkpoints that we can find. So for example, as a classical example of the bank account in event sourcing, then we can record incoming transfer, we can register credit card payment or other payment, or withdraw cash from ATM. And event sourcing at the first step is not any different from the classical approach. So we need to handle some web request. We can call it a comment, a request, whatever. But what's the most important is that to be able to record those business meaningful events, this request also has to be and gather the business intent. So for example, withdraw cash from ATM. And when we are doing, then the next step, and this is what's different from the event sourcing from the classical approach, is that our states are all of the events, all of the facts about, for example, our bank account. So we need to gather all of them. And when we have them, then we can build a default object. So for example, the account with a balance 0, because when we created the account, then it should be 0 typically. And then we are applying event by event. So in our simplified case, we are just taking incoming transfer. So then we are increasing the balance. If we are applying the credit card payment, then we are decreasing the balance, etc. And here you might already notice the first power of the event sourcing. So for example, if we see balance 0, then it might mean that we didn't have any transaction recorded, but it might also mean that we had like 100 transaction, but just we don't have any money. So, we are broke. And also, if we have a look on, for example, 400, then we don't know precisely what has happened because we only see the current state. And the power of event sourcing is that we can capture all of the granular business information. And this is really important nowadays because nowadays storage is cheap, but information is priceless. So event sourcing is not like extreme revolution. It just gives us more options. So let's move on. Event stores are databases, and they have, as in the nutshell, they are just append-only log. So when we are recording a new information in our system, then we are adding that at the end of a log, which is not extremely surprising if you know the database internals, because for some that might be mind-blowing, but relational databases works precisely like that. So they have transaction log or write-ahead log, and when we are committing transactions, then tables are not write models. They are just read models of the transaction log. So event stores are databases, but just simple databases, because in event stores, in theory, we can have just two operations: get all of the events from the stream, and stream is just a representation of the specific record. So all of the events that happened for a specific user, for a specific invoice, and so on and so forth. So we can get all of the events from the stream or append at the end. So that's really simplified database, but that's powerful because we can optimize also our storage, because we know precisely what are the usage patterns. And as you already know, the worst thing in databases are the random reads and random updates, plus fighting with deadlocks. With event stores, it's much simpler because we don't have many options. So the simplicity in this case is kind of also the superpower. And here we come to the Marten, because Marten is a .NET library, maybe framework even. Jeremy is not wanting to call it like that, so I shouldn't be probably mentioning that. But yeah, it's a library that is in a symbiosis with the Postgres. So you should think about the Marten plus Postgres as a document database and also event store, which is the most important here. The simplified table that can be used as an event store in relational database, you can see on the screen. And there are two types of data in this table. So we can notice that the first group of the data are metadata. So those are information that will be the same types for all of the events, because each event needs to have its own ID. It needs to be related to some stream, so to some record. So stream ID in that regards is just a record ID. Version, because we need to know what's the order of appearance of that event. So we need to know which event happened before or after another. And we also need to record the type of event, which is, for example, cash withdrawn for ATM and etc. And the other part is data. And data we can store as JSON-B, because each event will have its own data. It's because in general, events should just gather the precise information about what has happened during our business processing, so the result of our processing. So they should be as small as possible, but not smaller. And here Postgres shines because it has great support for JSON. You can create indexes. I saw that there is some weirdo that tried to run WebAssembly on Postgres. That's not what I would recommend, probably, maybe in the longer future, like a distinct future. But for now, let's say that JSON is a native type in Postgres, so you can do really extreme manipulation of the on that table. So let's go to code, because our webinar will be the hands-on experience, as you could imagine on the JetBrains Rider webinar. We need to show Rider. So we'll be doing today and building a simple application that is just but workable application, a web API based on .NET 6, Marten, and of course event sourcing. So what you can see here on the screen, if you didn't use the .NET 5 or 6, then there was a trend in the front-end application that everything was a single page application. And in .NET 6, you can build a single file application. So we won't be doing a lot of that, but we will be putting a lot in the single file. So this is how the simplified startup of the slimmed version of the startup in .NET 6 could look like. The domain that we will be handling today will be the help desk. So everything that is related to handling like a support ticket. In the help desk domain, a ticket or bug is called in general incident. It's something bad that happened. So for example, you cannot log into your enterprise computer, which is probably not surprising, but it happens. So let's start with the incident. If we were doing the classical application, then that would be what we are typically starting. So we are adding some entity. So in our case, the incident could be, of course, it will have some ID, because we cannot have entity without ID, some status, some information about, for example, whether there is some outstanding response that the agent should do to customer. Help desk ticket, once it's logged, so it's created, then it needs to be prioritized. So for example, whether this is a P1 ticket, which is extremely important to get the proper SLA, so to handle that ticket in the specific time manner, We need to categorize that to be able to easier help it. And we can assign someone, or probably should assign someone to handle that. And that's how we would typically start. So we would start with the uh, current state, because that's what we know if we are just using the uh, relational or document databases. It's not bad. I'm not saying that CRUD applications are good, are bad, but we can do better than that. And let's see how we can do it. So in event sourcing, in event sourcing, we in general start from events, because we are doing event sourcing, so events are our source of truth. So that's what we should be probably doing. Let me paste also another type. So okay, so this is where the closeness between technical representation and the business representation is getting into each other. So we are starting to think, in a sense, and visualize our business process in the context of the specific event that might happen during the specific workflow. And if we have a think about our entities or aggregates, then each of it has its own workflow. Even the simple crudish entities have their workflow. But when we work with some domain that at the beginning looks like a crudish domain, then once we are working longer and longer, then we are starting to realize that it's much more complex than we thought initially. So if we start with the discussing what's happening precisely during our process, for example, using event storming or event modeling, those are the emerging techniques, or discussing requirements with business, then we might find out that, well, those events are in fact gathering a lot of important information. So the first thing that can happen, as I mentioned, is that we are logging the incident. That's usually done by customer or someone on the call. Then we should categorize that. So the category is, for example, software, hardware, network, etc. It's specific to the domain of the tickets we are handling. We need to prioritize that. We can assign some agent. We can then respond. Agent can respond, like, for example, ask another question, some details about the incident, and then customer can respond. Once it's done, the agent can say that we are resolving this event, but that's not ending the typical flow, because then customer needs to acknowledge the resolution, because it's not like we can say, no, that's not a bug, that's a feature, and just call it a day, even though we would like to. But in general, customer should confirm that this is really a feature. And after that, we can close it. So as you can see, if we are discussing our process with the events, it's kind of like a storytelling. And Greg Young told that if we are starting to think about our systems based on events, then we are starting to think unintentionally sometimes about the business. And that's what we should be doing. So event sourcing in general helps to get the common understanding between the business domain and the technical. And we can even have exactly the same representation. Okay, but let's think how we could turn those events into this entity that I added at the beginning. I need to find it. Yeah, here it is. So we have our incident, and if we are using event sourcing, then as I said, we are not making total revolution. We don't have to. We can just use also the classical entities, because if we are making decision, then we are making decision based on the current state of our entity. So that's not much different than the in a classical approach. So as I mentioned, and as I show you on the slides, we need to get all of the events that were recorded for this particular entity and then apply them one by one. So if we have the first event, incident logged, then we can assume that there were no, or there should not be any other events. So we can just create an static method and just return new incident and take the incident ID and create a new entity. Then we can apply, because this is a public method, not a static one. So we can apply and create a new version of our entity based on the event. So, this is webinar, so I'm using some fancy .NET 6 syntax. If you care about allocations, then of course you don't need to create. You could do it like use void and just assign that. So you don't have to do it like that, but this looks cool and it's kind of documentation. It's just easier to read because you can see precisely that if when we categorize the events, then we are assigning category. If if agent responded, then we can assume that all of the outstanding questions are answered. If customer responded, then we can say that there is something that agent should answer. So yeah, we need to define such an apply method for each of our event. Of course, stream doesn't need to contain all of the types of the events. If we are early in the stage, then for example, we might have just 3 of them, or we might have 10 events of the customer response because that's someone that cannot wait for finish and just sending us question, is it closed? Is it closed? Is it ready? So it's possible that we will have a numerous events of the same type. But what's most important is that typically we can assume that this will be like a happy path. And right now, probably a lot of people can ask themselves, like, what if we have a lot of events? But what does it mean a lot? Like in probably during the incident, there might be like 50 at most, maybe 100 events for the specific support ticket. And support tickets typically live quite short, or they should in general. Then like getting 50 records and the granular records, because as I mentioned, events should get just a specific data for this event, isn't a big deal for the database. So we could do some optimization, but maybe let's leave it for the Q&A part if someone is curious. And now we know how we can get the current state from of our incident, so of our entity. So we are just taking all of the events and we will be calling them, all of those apply methods, one by one for the collection of events. I will get into that later on to see how Marten can help on that, because Marten will optimize that. Let's just start to define our business logic, because just rehydrating our current state is nothing fancy, and we can all agree that without the proper business logic, there is no need for that. And so I will define right now the domain service. You can use aggregates if you are a fan of DDD, but today I'll be showing the simplest way of handling event sourcing. Then it's up to you to decide whether you need more layers or whether you need some other structures. But I'm just showing, or I'm at least trying to show you that event sourcing doesn't have to be so hard. You don't need to do all of those fancy DDD patterns. They are great, but not always needed. So typically, not always, but typically for all of the events that we defined, we need to have accordingly comment. So if we have incident logged, then we will probably have log incident, because the event is just a representation of what has happened about the fact after we process this intention. So we can define following comments like log incident, categorize, prioritize, assigned, etc. As you can see, data in comments is a bit shorter because some of the data will be calculated on the business service. There are only information that are sent through our user from UI, from API, etc. So typically, commands are similar to events, but not precisely the same. So let's try to define our service. And don't be scared about the code, but this is not too much. So we can define our service, in fact, like a static class, because what we will be doing, and what's another power of event sourcing, it's just predictable. So if we have a specific comment, and if we have the specific state, then result should be always the same. And the result is always an event. So for the log incident comment, it's just we are taking command data and we are creating new event. There is not much of the business logic. If we are categorizing, then we need to verify whether this incident is not already closed, because we can only categorize pending pending incident, and then we are creating another event. Of course, typically, in our case, our business logic will be much more complex, but if you'd like to put some more business logic besides the basic validation, then it would go over here. Right? Sorry. Over here. So this is not much different from the classical approach. If you'd like to, if you need some external dependency, then you can also use the injection through the method parameter, like some fancy interface. Khalid wrote that I'm fancy, so I need to continue. And and then call it here. So we can also have the external dependencies. But if we'd like to, then we don't need to use the static methods. We can also just define the classical service, inject it through constructor, etc. So this code is not looking much different than our regular approach. We are just getting the current state, some comment with the business intent, and we are returning as a result an event. Nothing spectacular here. So let's use finally Marten. We will define a extremely complex core code here. Don't be afraid. I won't be creating iRepository. I know that Jeremy is watching, so he would kill me because of that. So I won't be doing that. We will just use what Marten is giving us. So let's add some document session extensions. By the way, I'm not sure why people saying that, no, I'm not using repository. So what are you using? I'm using extensions. Okay, but isn't just extension yet another way of just implementing repository pattern? Side note. And we will be defining how we would like to add new event. And if we are adding, then we assume that there is no stream. So we can call start stream method, and we will be just appending new event. Document session, if you used entity framework, and probably you did, then document session is the something similar like a DB context in entity framework. And even though there are just 2 lines here, then this is really important because Marten internally is benefiting from having the relational database underneath. So we have the transaction wrapped around saving changes. So this is the same as you would call in the DB context save changes. And what's that make this adds more options, because, for example, if we had like, I'm not saying that you should, but let's say that you would like to start two streams with the different events, because you had this logic that you need to update, or you, at least at that moment, you assume that you need to update two different aggregates. Then typically all majority of event stores do not allow to do that, because you can just append event to the single stream. But as Marten is implementing unit of work, then you can do it. Not that I would recommend to do that, but sometimes we need to be pragmatic, or calling differently, sometimes we are in a position that we need to do some hacking. So in general, our Marten way is not, we are not telling people how they should be living and how they should code. We are just giving them the tool. Of course, we are giving them some recommendations, like do not try to mock iDocument session, but and this interface is intentionally huge. So if you are thinking about doing that, then just don't. But besides that, there are not a lot of rules that we are trying to force others to do that. And finishing the adding new record, if we are updating the state, then typically what we are doing in our applications is that we are getting the current state, we are running some business logic, and as a result, we are storing new state. So this is something that everyone needs to do in each project, needs to copy and paste from the previous project, usually the implementation of the repository pattern. So Marten is helping in that. You can call a method that is called write to aggregate. And what it does, it just gets all of the events from the specific stream. So for the specific entity, or for example, in our case, a specific incident, then it applies all of those events and building the current state of our aggregate automatically. We don't need to do any plumbing to have those apply methods be called. And I didn't tell you that, but this is a Marten convention. So if you want to rehydrate your state, then you have to have this method. But so apply for each event. You can have for the initial event a static create method. And Marten, if you call aggregate to stream or write to aggregate, it will do it automatically for you. So write to aggregate returns you the current state, the flattened version, so incident. We can call some handle method that will run the business logic and return event, and we can store it to the same stream that we just got those events. And we can also use the optimistic concurrency. So maybe let me get back to the slides for a moment. And optimistic concurrency, some of you probably will be bored by this explanation, but those that are not, then listen carefully, because that's one of the patterns that I think that everyone should be using. So optimistic concurrency is making sure that we are making decision based on the current state. So let's say that two people tried, like me and my wife, tried to cheat the bank, and at the same time we synchronized our clocks, and we tried to withdraw money that we don't have. Like we have only 100 euro, and we tried to get 200. So what we can do in our application is we can get the current version of the stream, which is the same as the number of events in our stream. And if we say that both those two people try to get the 100, and even with the synchronized clocks, and do it at the same time, then we can send in the comment our expected version. So the version that we observed. So we know that our stream has three events, then we are saying we are making decision based on this state. And if this version matches, like the version in the database, then it's fine. We can withdraw money. But then the version is automatically incremented. And if the second person try to withdraw the money, then it won't be possible because there is a clash in the version handling. So the change won't be done. So we're getting the strong consistency. So it's a lot of people are saying that you cannot get a strong consistency and you cannot get the guarantees from the databases like typically do, like read your own rights, make decision based on the latest state, etc. And that's not true for the event sourcing, at least not for all event stores. And majority of the event stores that I know have the strong consistency and really strong transaction guarantees. So this myth is usually coming from the people that are trying to use Kafka as an event store. Don't do that. It's a great tool for moving events from one place to another, but this is not a database. And event stores are some sort of database. Okay, so let's try to plug that into our API. So let's go to our program and build our single page application. By the way, Khalid, I learned that from you. So watch Khalid tips, because for being .NET developer for like, I don't know, 14 years, I didn't know that you can use static and just use static methods. And
You know,
that
things are always changing in .NET, so we're all learning. So you're welcome. And also, I'm learning a lot during this webinar, so thank you. So I'll let you get back to the webinar.
Yeah. So I will again just cheat a bit. I promise live coding, but it is more like a live copy and pasting. But I hope that's fine. I think that no one likes see people just copying and pasting. Okay. So let's see what we did here. I will make it green in a moment with the magical switch to other rider window. But let's focus for now what we are doing. So we defined endpoints. This is the way how you can do it in .NET 6, minimal APIs. If you don't like minimal APIs, that's fine. You can use controllers. I'm just showing because, as I mentioned, I want to do some fancy new .NET code. But you can use your preferred way of handling API. What's the most important is that we are just calling this documentation session add method that we defined here. And this handle method is the static method that we defined here. And what we did and what we used with this using static. So we can do it like that. And then see, we have handle method everywhere that looks like a mediator, but it's not mediator. You don't need any command buses or event buses. If you'd like, you can use them. But as I mentioned, I'm just trying to show you the basic things. So let's have a look on some endpoint that is doing update, like for example, categorization. So we are doing just getting and updating the incident, so our entity with a specific ID that we are taking from the params here. We are getting the expected version from the ETAG. If you are not using ETAG and if match headers, then I encourage you to look at the Mozilla docs. They are great and explaining how to use them. But in general, we need to somehow send the expected version that might be part of the body or as a header. Then we are just letting Marten deal with the things. So we are just going right to aggregate. That will get us the current state of aggregate, call the handler that we passed as a parameter, and just store yet another event. So here, so we are just calling this handler that is taking the current state, the comment, and as a result of our extremely complicated business logic is returning a new event. Of course, your logic will be probably much smarter and much more fancier than mine, but still, I hope that you are getting the feeling that it's not like extreme revolution here. So we can define all of the events, and they are kind of repeatable. So in a sense that we are just mapping our API into comment, and as a result, we are storing new new event. So as you see, the usage pattern is always the same, just the mapping is a bit different. So for example, we are returning OK for the update, or we are returning created for a new event. So nothing spectacular here. So I will just stop now with the copy and pasting, and because I would like to show you how to get data from Marten. Because as I promised, see, no red errors. We even have this to expected version implemented. We are just using .NET type, so I'm not extremely smart. I'm just copy and pasting. That's what we do, right? And we can define, besides posts, we can define get methods. And Marten give us multiple options of how we can deal with data, because Marten not only stores event payloads, event data as a JSON, but Marten also allows you to use Postgres as a document database. So then you are storing your, I can probably just show you how that looks like. So yeah, Marten, if we have a number of data, then like the read models, so for example, details of our incident that we will use for the update form, we can have short info, which is just a typical shortened information with smaller set of data. We can have some human readable history and some summary for customer. And let's have a look how this table looks like. So we have ID of our record, which is typically GUID. It can be any string. And we have data, which is JSON. So as you can see, it is nothing more than that. And here, I'm not sure if that's the power of Marten, probably more about Postgres, but Postgres allows you to even put indexes on the JSON. Those indexes are almost as performant as a regular one, sometimes even faster. So I encourage you to have a look. Plus, Postgres costs 0 as a license, which is a good thing comparing to other options. And Marten allows you to query those informations with queryable. So exactly the same as with Entity Framework. Some syntax might not be supported, but I think that we have a decent set of supported combination. So you can use where. And Marten also give you some syntactic sugar like get paged list. So to get one page of the data, you don't need to write it. You could, of course, do like a to-list async, to-list async, etc. So everything that you could do with the traditional data access library. But if we have a look and think about this data that I show you, this JSON, then why do we need to just get this JSON just to deserialize it to our CLR type and then serialize it again to the JSON that we are returning through API? If we are just doing queries, then what we can do is we can call, for example, write by ID or write array, and those methods won't be doing any deserialization and serialization loop. It will just run a query on the Postgres, so the query that you defined with where, and all of the results will just take the JSON and send it in an unattached way through the API, which is, I think, super cool feature because it's really performant. It cannot be more performant than that. So of course you can have write by ID. If we are getting details, then you don't need to do any additional queries. So let's have a look how we can get all of those read models from our events. Marten gives you the add Marten method, not surprising method, to configure all of the things that you can do with Marten. As I mentioned, iDocument session is really thick interface, and you can do a lot of things with Marten, but we will be focusing right now over here. So in event sourcing, projections are the different representation of the same information. So I like to show this picture. I'm not sure, do you know who's there? Probably you recognize Muhammad Ali, but below there is a Sonny Liston, and Sonny Liston was at that time pretty good boxer. Maybe not at that precise time, but he was a decent boxer. And this fight lasted like 1 minute and 44 seconds, I believe. Until this day, no one knows whether this was a real fight or a made-up fight. Because no one saw the punch touching face of Sonny Liston, and this punch is named in the box history Phantom Punch. So the same fact, so that the boxing fight finished, is totally different interpretation for the Muhammad and for the Sonny. And what's more, it's also totally different interpretation for all of the boxing fans. They are arguing even till this day. And this fight was, I think, like 40 years ago, something like that, or even more. Then, as I mentioned, projections are the same. So we can have a look on our events from totally different angles and try to understand them in a different way. And then when we are getting all of the events, then we can do what is typically called a left fold. So left fold means that we are just taking event, and if it's the first one, then we are inserting new record into the database. If we are getting another event, then either we are just updating the record, or we are getting the record from database, running some small logic and applying the data from event, and so on and so forth. And if you can see already, you might notice that stream aggregation. So what we are doing is also getting the current state of our entity is also some sort of the projection, because we are just taking a set of events and getting the other understanding. So Marten gave us two options around projections. So projections, and that's another myth about event sourcing, that read models cannot be created in a sync way, in the same transactions. It only depends on the exact event store implementation. In Marten, if you are using the classical inline projections, then they are stored in the same projection, in the same transaction as event is appended. So you can still have this, this strong consistency also for the read models. Of course, you might want to have the asynchronous to optimize, because there is nothing bad in having asynchronous projections. And what's more, our recommendation is to, if you have like the projections that are doing something more, some fancier one, then just use the async one. It's totally fine to distinguish that case by case. If you don't have extreme traffic, and in my system, we were using this inline projections within the same transaction for majority of our projections, and we were fine. So you can decide whether this projection should be handled in a sync way or in async as a background process, which is called async daemon, which is running as a hosted service in your application. So you can decide how you would like to proceed. So let's have a look on the projections and how to define them. So projections are just read models, so interpretations of our events. So for example, for short info, we are fine to just get the status and the number of nodes, so then how many discussion it was, and some categorize and prioritize. And Marten provides you also the base classes for those projections. For example, single stream aggregation will just take the ID of this specific read model based on the stream ID, so from the event metadata. And it will get the current state of our read model, and then either we can update them if you are caring a lot about allocations, but if you are not caring like me, then you can use this immutable records and return new version of the state. But what's most important is that Marten will handle that for you. So it will get the current state of your read model, and then you just need to write the apply logic, and Marten internally will update to the upsert of your read model. For the details projection, then we can have this is exactly the same, because this is just another representation, but enriched. So for example, we have all details of our nodes, etc. But the logic is the same, because we are applying the data based on the same stream. And this is also powerful because of that, because we have those read models fine-tuned for our needs, for the queries that we are running, then we can do the optimization that I show you, because we don't need to do any additional selections or mapping. We can just call write array and just take the JSON that we have and return to the user. So because and that's yet another power of the event sourcing of the CQRS, that because we are focused on the business intent, then we know precisely what we can return and what we do, and we can do also some performance optimization based on that. So projection, as I mentioned, is just yet another interpretation of the events, and the projection looks really the same as our entity that I show you. A bit different, if we would like to do a bit more, is the event projection. And event projection allows you to do really whatever you want with your events. So for example, you can get event together with metadata and write some human readable record history for that. So for example, you are saying that for each event, I'll be appending new incident history record. And as you can see, this incident history just have the incident history ID, incident ID, and some human readable information. So like an audit log of what has happened that human can read. I mean, if this human is programmer, then he or she would probably be able to read JSON, but majority of people are not able to do that. And the other projections that we might have is the multi-stream aggregation. And the multi-stream aggregation allows us to get events from a different streams and join them together. So for example, we would like to build the history and the summary of all incidents, of all active incidents for the specific customer. And our entity is incident. So we need to get multiple streams, events from multiple streams, and somehow join them together. So that's why we need this constructor, because we cannot just use the stream ID from our metadata. We need to specify how to get the stream ID. And we need to say that, for example, we are taking this information from the event data, and because we are building the projection that will be specific for the customer, and we will know all of the counts of the types of incidents, then we need to take this customer ID and then create a new entry or update new entry. What's more, we can also use the custom grouping. I will show you in a bit what's custom grouping. But for this incident logged, we will be trying to find a summary for the specific customer, and as we are adding new pending incident, then we are just increasing the pending count. And for the others, we need to do a bit more. So for resolved, we are decreasing the pending, we are incrementing resolved, and so on and so forth for all of the statuses. So we can show the statuses progression. But we cannot get, we need to do a bit more, because customer ID is available only in the incident logged. Because as I mentioned, events should be granular. So we shouldn't, in general, push all of the state information through all the events, just those that are specific to this business operation. So we need to get this customer ID somehow. And custom grouping allows us to do that, because we can implement iAggregate grouper, which is just a transformation. You can do whatever you want, not always grouping. But you have then access to the query session, which is the read-only document session, so like a read-only DB context, all of the events that we are currently processing, and we need to return somehow at those transformed events. So we can get all of the events from those specific types. So incident resolved, closed, resolution acknowledged, and we can, for all of those events, we can try to get incident ID from them, because all of them will contain incident ID. Then we can take this stream ID, and then Marten also have methods for querying raw event data. So we can get a query and get the customer ID, then group those data, and then join this information from the stream and get this customer ID and enrich those events. And then after those transformation, then those events will be just called, and the Marten will take this ID, so the customer ID, to find to find the read model and apply all of the events. And that's in general how the projection looks like. And well, whoa, slow down. I know that we are close to the finish, but yeah. So let's just do a recap of what we did. And I hope that I show you that event sourcing is not so difficult. It's different. It gives us more options. I'm not saying that right now you need to go to your boss and tell, no, we are dropping whatever we were doing. We are just, doing this event sourcing thing. That's not what I would recommend. But for sure, it would be good if you play with that. Because that gives you more option, more tooling to your developer tooling, and more understanding, and giving you option to use it at some point where it would be a good matching. So this is not event sourcing, as I mentioned. If you see that, run away immediately. Event sourcing is about capturing the business intention, logging that, and then enabling event-driven approach. So building applications that are close to the business, so we are able to represent the business flow in our code as it is. And we are still having all of the guarantees, especially with Marten. So we can use optimistic concurrency. We can get strong consistency also on the projection side. So for the projections, Marten, and that's really rare. I don't know any other event store to be true. And I know quite a bit of them. As Khalid said, I'm guru. No, I'm not. But that's quite unique for Marten, that we are giving option to use the same tool for querying and for read models as for storing events. And if projections are just different interpretations of the set of events. And the powerful thing about that is that you can build many projections from the same event. So for example, if agent was assigned to incident, then you might update incident details, incidents dashboard, agent assignment, etc. So that gives you more option about the performance optimization, etc. But you can still query the specific rows, do SQL, etc. So it's not like you when you are doing read models, you need to get all of the events to and apply them. And projections might be synchronous, but might be also asynchronous. It's up to you to decide based on your scenario. So that's also the leitmotif of this presentation. So be pragmatic and be useful and use it where it shines. And that's all about me. I encourage you to contact me. I saw that there were a lot of questions. I thank you, Jeremy, for answering some of them. And hi, Babu. Jeremy, Babu, and Yona Pekka are our team. That's also one of the things that is keeping me with Marten. So we have really, I love our team, and we have quite vibrant community. So you can check docs, go to our Gitter. We are trying to answer as much as possible, not only about tooling, but also based on our experience. And also I'm sharing my journey on my blog, on Architecture Weekly. All of these things that you saw during this presentation, this code is already available in my sample repository. And really, you email me, contact me. I'm really happy to answer all of your questions. And that's all. Thank you, Khalid. Thank you, JetBrains, for inviting me here. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, this is an awesome talk, by the way. So congratulations, Oskar. Again, thank you for this webinar. I do have some thoughts and some questions that I've kind of gathered. You did mention Jeremy and Babu are in the chat, so they've been answering a lot of the questions in detail while they're being asked. But first of all, thoughts that I got from your talk. Because event sourcing does sound scary. You mentioned some people feel it could be difficult, but you said it's not difficult. It's just different. It's like a different way of thinking about it. So I appreciate you saying something like that. You also said it's a design implementation. It's not an architectural implementation. So like from your point, you can do event sourcing today with the infrastructure that you have in place, especially if you're using something like PostgreSQL as your data store. So that's kind of what I appreciate about it. Have you found in your experience using Marten that when you have a complex team of developers and database administrators, that database administrators are more comfortable working with something like Marten because they can kind of stick with their usual tool set, like data grip, for example?
Yeah, for sure. Having the relational database underneath is helpful, especially that in many organizations still ops people are the decision makers in case of buying tools and using tools. So they quite often are deciding of making their choices based on how it is easier for them to maintain them. And Postgres, you can use it on all of the cloud providers, Azure, AWS, Google. You have also some cheap options like Fly.io that gives you for free Postgres. And So yeah, I think that this is making things easier. I'm not saying which is better or worse, because in theory, like if you are shaping your own memory underneath, then you have much more options for optimization. But then the question is, are you able to use them? Because you then need to design everything on your own. So Postgres, in my opinion, is just rock solid database. Even if you don't want to use Marten, then Postgres is great. And yeah, we are just using what it is giving us and adding some sugar on top of that.
Yeah, I think you make a good point too. It's like it's not good or bad, but I think teams and developers have to be realistic about picking tools that they can actually maintain and build applications on things that they understand. So if you try to make too many drastic changes right away, that could set you up for failure when in reality you want to succeed. So Marten being in that relational ecosystem kind of helps you succeed just based on the fact that it's going to use a lot of the things your organization, your team are likely already familiar with, right?
Yeah. Of course,
The,
it's not like extremely so simple as I mentioned. Like, for example, if you decide that you would go with the event-driven approach, then you can do migration on the JSON-B fields. I did that even for events, but that's not what I would recommend if you are already on production. Because even if you are doing not monolith but microservice or SOA or whatever, if you have distributed environment and you are communicating between modules with events, then even if you migrate and sort out your data in your database and you don't propagate this information further on, then it won't be other won't be informed. So it's also in that sense, I would be lying if I said that it's just the same experience as using the traditional relational approach. But yeah, for sure it's much easier. And of course, right now I would say that I'm sounding like a marketer. I was developer advocate, but I think that in general in .NET space around, and not only about event sourcing, but if you are building your startup and you need to quickly iterate and try things out, then Marten gives you that option because JSON is flexible, and you don't need those migration on the tables because all of the tables looks the same as I show you. So it helps you because also it automatically creates those tables. So yeah, I really encourage to have a look because it can speed up the development process in many ways.
Okay, very cool. Thank you for that answer. I guess I have a couple questions more coming in here. We're talking about event streams and having it be like a read only or like append only logging system, but I think this person's name is Lane, but or Ian. I'm sorry, I apologize. But for GDPR compliance, how do you delete events, or should you ever delete events in your append only log? What do you do in that kind of scenario?
So you can do multiple things in general, as you have the relational database underneath, and you can do the same strategies as you would do for the regular. But for event sourcing is a bit different, and the most popular way is called crypto shredding. It always reminds me of the shredder from Ninja Teenage Turtles. I was a huge fan, but getting back to the GDPR, Postgres has a plugin that is named PG Crypto, but you don't need to use PG Crypto. You can handle that on your own, for example, with the secure key management store. What's most important is that you need to have the certificate, like the secure key for each of the person. And you need to encrypt either the whole payload or part of. I would recommend to just encrypt part of, because if you encrypt the whole payload, then effectively it's like you would delete the event, and that may break your business logic. And when this person decides that it would like to be anonymized, then you are just throwing away the secured key, and you won't be able to decrypt the data. So with PG Crypto, you have it out of the box. With the KMS or other secured stores, you need to write a bit on your side, but that's not extremely complex. I wouldn't recommend to just use default encryption .NET classes. But in general, of course, there is a concern. So, because, I'm not a lawyer, so don't tell your security guy that this is how I advised you, because I'm not a lawyer. You need to ask your own security officer. I heard some interpretation that it's not allowed to encrypt that because, even RSA keys were broken at some point. Of course, the time when those 256 kilobytes, so bytes keys will be broken will be probably, I don't know, maybe even never, but it might in theory happen. Then what you would need to do then probably encrypt again this information, etc. But in my case, and in majority of cases and majority of companies that I talk to, there is not, only few lawyers thought that they are not agreeing with that. So majority tactics is to just encrypt that and throw away the encryption key. The other strategies are to keep this information separated, even to separate service, and to have easier maintenance. So the Matthias Veres has a pattern that he called the forgettable payload. So instead of sending the PII or GDPR data, you are just sending link to this data. And this data is kept in somewhere else, and then it can be removed from somewhere else. But of course, then you need to have this performance degradation because you need to do another calls, etc. And it's making things more complex. So my general advice would be to check the crypto shredding, and if that is not working for you, then just use the same tactics as you are using.
Yeah, I mean, I would think like storing your GDPR data separate from your events would make a lot of sense, and having a link to it. So again, with Marten, you have access to both the event sourcing system, but you can also store data separately as just documents. So you can always link to stateful information like someone's name or address. And then if someone decides to be anonymous, then you just delete that data, but don't modify your events, right? So I guess this leads to the next question, which I thought was actually a really good one. How do you fix bugs? So you showed all those handle methods, but what if there's a bug in a handle method, but you've already kind of run all your projections, and that handle method is kind of in the middle? Like, what do you do in that case? Do you fix the bug, or do you just add a new handle method to kind of append a new event that's like a correcting event? Like, what would you recommend in that situation?
Yeah, so let me tell you the lame joke and lame story. I'm always comparing that to the situation that you are on the party, or you were at the party. You are waking up in the morning, you are checking your mobile, and you see like, oh gosh, and you texted your ex, and what you gonna do? What you gonna do? So this is the same type of question. So you have a few options, right? Depending on the communicator that you are using. Skype allows you to modify the data, and Marten allows you to do that. But as we already discussed, even if you modify this data, then I don't know, but on the chat there is like Newt HD. Did I summon them?
You must have. I am removing them right now.
That's nice. Okay. But that's funny. So you can try to modify that, but as I mentioned, this won't be propagated outside of your module. So what you can do is you might try to delete this information, and in Marten you can also in theory delete this event. That's not what I would recommend, but in theory it could work, but don't do that. And the best option, if you just did that, just say sorry, right? So so that's the only way that you are ensured that that you somehow compensated this operation, right? That's the only way that you sure that you didn't break anything. So in case of event sourcing, you should just post an event that is correcting this information, and so compensating event. And that's also important, that why you should not throw exception in the apply, and you should not, in general, in the apply method, you should not run much business logic, because then if you throw exception because you checked some invariants, then you would just close your way to compensate that, because the event that you will add will happen at the end. Then if you process all of the events, then your state will be, in the end, will be correct, and the business logic should be responsible for checking invariants, not applying those operations. And that looks quite scary. But on the other hand, if you have back in your data in the classical way, when you only keep the current state, then this is exactly the same scenario. But the only difference is that in event sourcing, the history, and you might even track which event is broken and why is it broken. And in classical approach, you just know that it's broken and you need to fix it somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of segues into like my last thought, that, watching your presentation, you mentioned right at the beginning, storage is cheap, but information is priceless. So like, even if your system has mistakes in it, it's worth preserving those mistakes, because you can at least go back and do like a forensic audit of like what occurred during that time where the bug was in production. So, it's like there's a ton of questions about optimization, and you could probably talk another hour, but I want to be respectful of your time. I'd love to kind of invite you back on if you ever do a talk about optimizing an event sourcing system and like common performance pitfalls. I know our audience right now would be really, really excited about that. So no pressure. I know it will be fancy if you do that talk. So again, I'm extending that to you. And again, thank you to you and your Marten co-maintainers. As you mentioned, I think you had over like 130 contributors to that open source project.
For sure, over 100, which is really confirmation that our community is really active.
Yeah, it's amazing. So on that note, let's wind down. And if you folks want to reach out to Oskar, be sure to follow him on Twitter. Be sure to go check out Marten on GitHub. Here's some links. Be sure to, if you want to know more about Rider, which is the IDE Oskar is using, go to jetbrains.com/Rider. If you want to read some of our .NET content, you can access that at blog.jetbrains.com/.NET. Be sure to follow us on Twitter. And if you're watching us on YouTube, do us a favor, hit the like, subscribe, leave any comments for any future webinars you'd like to see on there. Again, Oskar's content, go check him out on eventdriven.io. He has a lot of great event sourcing content there. I also think he does a lot of workshops as well. So if your company is interested in going down the event sourcing route, go check it out. Reach out to Oskar. I think he'd be more than happy to kind of help you on your event sourcing journey there. Also, he has a premium newsletter called Architecture Weekly. There's a lot of good links on there, a lot of thoughts that you add, Oskar, that I think our viewers would appreciate. So check that out. And finally, again, be sure to follow him on Twitter. he's always tweeting about event sourcing stuff. So it's pretty cool. So on that note, again, please subscribe. Let us know how this webinar went for you. We like doing these and we need your feedback. So again, thank you. Thank you to Oskar. Thank you to the Marten community. And we'll see you folks next time.
Yeah. Thank you a lot. Bye.
Bye.